Hi everyone. It's so lovely to see everybody joining the call today. It's the 14th week out of 25 weeks, so we're over halfway, and we're headed for the downhill the downhill stint. It's going to start getting exciting now. I don't know if you've noticed, I've started putting the daily reflections in there to just try and increase the interaction. We were talking a second ago off air about the practice of Vipassana meditation and how the practice that it's encouraged is the observation of whatever arises and this concept of equanimity. Now, equanimity was also one of the principles. Are you okay there, Catherine? Did Tiddles jump on the keyboard? The Western contemplative tradition of Stoicism also arrived at this idea of equanimity, and they explored it philosophically as well as in practice. And the idea there is not to be without feeling or disimpassioned or numb. It's instead not to have a preference about what is transpiring, just simply allow. Now, the consideration that I want to leave you with, so one of the forms of meditation I'm teaching and practicing at the moment is this one of no doing. So if there's a little quote that I wrote about peace. Let me see if I can pull it up for you quickly. It's about what we're talking about now. 1 second. Ministry of Certainty. Let's have a quick look and see if we can find it. Peace. Peace is not when you cease all feelings. Peace is when you welcome all feelings. Enlightenment. Now think about that. Peace is not when you cease all feelings. Peace is when you welcome all feelings. But enlightenment then, enlightenment is when you realize that welcoming is still an act which admits of a self. So we're doing a trick on ourselves a bit when we're doing mindfulness practices, because we're still trying to do something. We're still trying to observe, we're trying to allow, we're trying to, all these things, as much as we want to trick ourselves that they're passive, require a doing, a commitment to, a choice to. Now, this ties in with the paradox of choice and surrender. If you really think philosophically what it means to surrender, if somebody comes and takes something from you and you have no control, they simply have more power to exert over the moment than you do, and they take something away from you. You don't surrender that thing. It wasn't a choice. Which means for a proper surrender to occur, there has to be a choice to surrender. You have to concede to surrender it. Similarly, when somebody or a practice is inviting you to surrender to something, it might be a mystical experience, it might be a life experience, it might be an emotional experience, it might be a circumstance. If you are going to surrender to that, you have to choose to surrender. And similarly, if you are going to make a choice, like I'm going to move to San Francisco, or I am going to do that second module in my degree, or I am going to ask for a raise, or I am going to challenge my partner about something, that the only reason that the choice mounted and became this life action that you had to invest in was because there was an alternative choice. You had to talk yourself into this. It wasn't a de facto thing that you could just flop into. You had to work yourself up to it. And which means there were two competing or more competing states. It was either easier to do nothing and leave the status quo as it was, but you ultimately surrendered to one of the choices. And so much of what we're doing in meditation is we're being told to still do something, to still welcome something. And then what we invariably do is smuggle this idea of self along for the experience, because then it's still, oh, you did that well, or I think I'm getting there, or who is the I that thinks they're getting there, and who is the one that is celebrating doing things well? Of course, it's the I. I had a good meditation session. Well, theoretically, you didn't have a meditation session. If you had a good meditation session, you didn't have a good meditation session. The most successful meditation session is not one that can be called good. It's just, there was nothing. So it's not to take the piss out of the effort, but it is to suggest that there is a little corner we can take in our thinking around this, where some of the practice can be, we can try it now if you want. If you're keen, let's spend a few minutes doing this. It'll be a lovely segue into the lesson for today. So wherever you are, just sit there and close your eyes. And I'm going to speak for a bit with your eyes closed. And we're going to be finding ourselves meditating in a moment. So take a nice grounding breath. What a grounding breath means is a nice, easy, long draw deep into the lungs through the nose. And then a nice, peaceful sigh, releasing that out. Just for a change, let's arrive in this moment with nothing to do, no objective, nothing to concentrate on, nothing to switch off, no way to sit, no way to breathe, nothing to focus on, nothing to do. There's nothing to fail at. Just come, arrive here exactly as you are. If the mind is busy, that's fine. If there's distractions, that's fine. If the cat's jumping on the keyboard, that's fine. If you're finding my voice irritating today, that's fine. Exactly as you are. Whatever feelings you have, whatever sensations are present, everything's allowed. You might notice that there's a sense of lightness or ease that accompanies this consideration of having nothing to do. No obligation, no duty, nothing to fail at, nothing to get wrong, no reason to try, just be, just sitting, just being with what is, absolutely being with what is. We can take an inventory through our bodies if we want. We can notice sensations, the sensation of sitting, the pressure, the cushion. There's feelings in our muscles, in our hands, in our face, in our scalp. They're just there. The mind's going to be thinking about things. It's going to be raising suggestions, chasing after things. There is a tendency when I mention different parts of the body to lean towards that part of the body, or towards the sound, or towards the sensation, or turn our attention like a spotlight. The awareness that I'm speaking to is aware of that swiveling spotlight, like the eye of Sauron in the movie, just swiveling around. The busy mind's going to do that anyway. You don't have to stop it. You don't have to track it. You don't even really have to notice it. Consider the feeling of having two hands. There's something that happens in the brain when you imagine both of your hands at the same time. And if I say synchronize your hands, there's a feeling that comes up. Again, there's nothing to do. There's no job here. There's no problem to solve. There's no solution to determine. It's just sitting. Just sitting. And already in this sitting, with nothing to do and nothing to fail at, we start tasting stillness. Look, you can open your eyes. That was just a very casual lean in towards something. And the pressure that we usually feel when you start a meditation practice, there is that sense of pressure. Because ultimately, in the back of our minds, we're still thinking that there's something to do, and therefore there's something we can fail at. And there is a range of practices which involve letting go and getting out the way, and doing it quite rapidly, actually. So I've started recording those. You can look into them. Now, as we're talking about that, let's start segueing into the discussion for tonight, which is about giving and receiving. The last thing I want to say about that is, Brian, when you asked the question, you and Chris were talking, somebody was saying there's a sensation as if there is something or someone else there sort of in charge of activity or actions. Things are coming up which they surprise you by them coming up. And part of the brain or the mind is still trying to categorize where they belong. Is this me? Is this the self? Is this awareness? And there's a lot of confusion. What there also is the limbic system and the nervous system. And these are the areas where the subconscious and the conscious have interfaces. And there are processes, more processes going on in your body than you are consciously aware of, that carry on without your complicity. You couldn't stop them if you tried. So how you're creating insulin in your pancreas, how you're moderating your salts out of your kidneys, how your bladder is filtering water, it's all just happening. And some of that is happening with the contribution of activities in the brain. And some of that interfaces with nervous system, and some of that interfaces with nervous system componentry and pathways that are used or borrowed by the conscious self. And when there's an overlap, when the same traffic is going down a highway lane that you use or you're aware of, then suddenly you become aware of some of these things coming up. There's just a lot going on under the surface. So what we're going to talk about today, very quickly, can you see my screen?
Got it.
Right. So what you're looking at is something that looks like a Christian cross, but it's not actually a Christian cross. But it might have bearings to the Christian cross, but we'll get to that later. So what we have is this vertical axis here. This is the condition of being a self, which is where you get constrained by choice. To be a self means you are constantly and always burdened by choice. To be a self means to have an innate inability to just accept the current moment as it is. There is always something which is dragging at the reins. So Plato has this metaphor of a charioteer, and the charioteer is got these two horses in the traces. The one horse is reason and the other one is passion. Now, if you can imagine, there's not only reason and passion, There's actually a whole bunch of emotion, and they're all slightly pulling off in different directions. And the aim of the charioteer is to try and marshal all these horses. Fundamentally, there is always a choice to make in every single moment. That condition of there always being a choice to make is called reluctance, which we'll talk about in a minute. So I've spoken about this before. Whether you are pulled down to your lower nature, I want the ice cream, I want to engage in sex, I want to do the base thing, or I want to do the high thing, the spiritual calling. The one will always be in contention with the other. You never just choose the one without the other voice on your shoulder going, no, we really should do the other thing. It doesn't matter whether it was the left or the right, the good, the bad, the up or the down. Not one single one of those choices will be made without reluctance. It's always an effort to weigh up the math between two opposing options and to choose whichever one you choose on the day. And you won't always consistently choose the same one, which means the gravities of these two polarities are fluctuating from moment to moment, depending on the sleep you've had, depending on the company you're in, depending on how subliminally you've been influenced by what you're watching, thinking, etc. Now, there's many inclinations that we can feel that reluctance personally. But let's simplify it and just consider in this vertical pillar, all that we have is this property of being a self, which means we are constrained by choice. We are constantly in every single moment burdened by choice. Until when you practice Zen, or if you've been in a Vipassana sitting for 7 days, you get this point over here where you are able to release this sense of self and surrender fully to the property and the field of consciousness. Which means all that you're doing is being aware of what is. And whatever there is nothing that is occurring that makes you want to interact, to choose for it to be any different. So somebody's taunting the cat, and a normal person would be moved by compassion to stop the taunting of the cat. There is a characteristic of somebody in Zen that will be able to watch even a measure of suffering, not because they are heartless. On the contrary, it's because there is no self to wish the current moment to be any different than it is. Rich experiences, shallow experiences, good experiences, bad experiences, these are all parts of samsara, all parts of the illusion that is just unfolding, all different expressions of energy, and all pantomimes of dramas made up by small selves, all arguing amongst themselves. And all they see is life, because there is no self. That's the experience that one encounters at the crossbar. Now, from the low point up to the high point, we have a low consciousness moving higher and higher and higher towards awakening, or towards these conscious practices. And at this point, one of the practices available on this planet, one of the paths, one of the paths that have been opened, was the path that was opened by the Buddha, which is the path of no self, of surrender, of non-attachment, non-self. And there are many practices which led up to that point. Remember, Vipassana is a Hindu practice fundamentally, and Buddhism was born out of Hinduism. And the whole body of practices, contemplative practices in the East, are the science of the mind and the study and practice of contemplative practices that can allow consciousness to blossom in various styles and various ways. And what we have in the 21st century in Western culture is a very strong sense of self, especially since we no longer live in villages. and we no longer live in big families and communities. We have to be. We are the mental conversation partner that we are with most of the time. We are the one whose opinion matters. We are the one who informs us of our sense of shame or guilt or victimhood or critique, which is why I teach one voice at a time, because we have subconsciously taken on the role of all the members of a family or a village that would contribute towards. Instead of outsourcing it now to other people, we've insourced this. And so we have these incredibly strong senses of self, which means it takes 7 days to get to this point after very, very serious practice to release something. So how are we going to do this? How do we not be absolutely shackled by this burden of choice all the time because we can't afford? How wonderful was that experience, Chris, being able to devote 10 days to going away and just encountering that peace? But what really is set for you now is a flag up on a hill that you're going to forever be trying to get back to, which is good and bad. The good thing is you now have something to aim towards. The bad is it's really, really going to be difficult to achieve, given the fact that the self has to be so strong and exercised and present and online to function in Western society and in amongst your family and your job and in the traffic. Very, very difficult. Very difficult. Which is why I'm developing these other practices so that we can find other ways to arrive at stillness without the full surrender of self. And there is another solution here where you don't take the off-ramp of self into Zen, into no self. You keep going and you develop your own will. But to develop your will means you cannot be moved. And this is what is happening here. It's being moved. To be a self is to be moved. Moved in nature and moved by nature at all times, all the time. By your metabolism, by your hormones, by pheromones, by thoughts, by feelings, by emotions, by triggers, by opinions, by fear of guilt, fear of shame, fear of exclusion, fear of disconnection. By the motivational triad, by the willingness and wish to avoid pain, and the wish to seek out pleasure, and the wish to do those two energy efficiently, which we call conservation of energy. That is how we are designed as cells, and that function has kept you alive this whole time. Now, why this is interesting is because this very dynamic is exactly why we have developed the relationships that we have. Because all of our relationships, on some level, have got to do with how we service those needs of avoiding pain, seeking pleasure, and conserving energy, how we meet our primal needs. And so there is always a transfer, a handoff between somebody that has something that we want and what we have to do to get it. There is always someone we have to acquiesce to. So remember, there's 3 strategies here. There is the one strategy is expression of power. The second strategy is compliance. The third strategy is withdrawal. Expression of power is forcing your will, acting, exerting, being creative. Those are positives. The negative expression is aggression. Compliance, positive expression is integration, connection. Negative expression is pleasing, martyrdom, acquiescing, complying to what other people want and martyring yourself, enduring. And the third one is withdrawal. Now, when we do retros in our agile practice, in the Alchemy program, what we are actually doing is we're coming to stillness in a moment, in a phase of our cycle, whether that's daily, weekly, monthly, or yearly. We're coming to a phase where there's no more doing to do. What was going to be done is done. What was going to be won was won. What was going to be lost has been lost. We can down tools and stop panicking. It is tomorrow's problem. And what we're doing is we're looking back, we're reflecting, and we're considering if we had our time again, when we embark on our next chapter, where are we going to invest our time, energy, and attention in expressing our power, in complying or connecting or integrating, or in withdrawing? So there's three fronts that we're always trying to fight. And we're trying to do it efficiently, and we're trying to drive more pleasure out and avoid more pain. But now human beings, it's not just simple that life's all about instant gratification and ice cream. We know that you go to the gym or you start a meditation practice to get the goal at the end. You know that you moderate your behavior when you're living with a partner so that you can have a harmonious relationship. We have the understanding that I'm going to pay a price now to get some kind of reward later. I'm going to do the spin class for 20 days so that I can feel fit at the end of it. Everybody understands this concept of a cost and the gift, right? So human beings are complex, which means it's not just simplistic anymore. Some of the things that we need to consider exerting our effort on or complying with, even if it's slightly uncomfortable, we'll still coerce ourselves into being compliant because of what we're trying to achieve at the end, because we are setting longer term goals, like the avoidance of discomfort and the avoidance of pain and the avoidance of regret. And in that heuristic and that calculus and that mathematics that we're all subconsciously doing all the time, the simplified way of notating that is called stop, start, keep, which we've taught each other in our agile practice. And what is happening here all the time? In all exchanges of power, the reason we comply, the reason we withdraw, the reason we express our power is about giving and receiving. Always. It is a universal principle. It is how physics works at the most fundamental atomic level. It's how electricity and energy works. It's how everything works. Everything is a concentration gradient. On one side, there's a high concentration, a lot of something, an abundance of, an excess of. And on the other side, there's a deficit of, there's a less. Yes, Luis.
What's the negative and positive expression of withdrawal?
Withdrawal, as in just shutting down and not being present. That's the negative expression, like actual withdrawal. And the positive expression is stillness. It's not pushing against, not contesting. It's equanimity. But I'm Switzerland. I'm pulling back. I'm not getting involved in this. So I'm not going to handle this month. I'll handle that. I'm withdrawing on that front. You know, Dimpner's main function at the moment is trying to juggle a new job, trying to like do all the shopping for the house. She does most of the laundry, and she looks after the baby. I mean, that is just a mental handful. And I was walking around, coming in from the office after my one phone call of the morning and going, oh, you haven't cleaned the coffee machine out. And like, fuck, Dimpner's running around doing a million things. Common sense said to me, dude, just that's an area to withdraw from. Seriously, just there's no win here. Even a win would not be a win. So I withdrew. So it's not always positive, it's not always negative. It can equally be positive. It's just where you choose to. I'm not investing energy here, man. I'm redrawing my boundaries of self. So I can determine for this upcoming little capture of season, whether it's a day, a week, a month, or a whole year, I'm choosing how I'm going to invest my budget, Which wars am I going to fight? Which campaigns am I going to run? How am I going to market myself? How am I going to integrate? How am I going to push forward? What am I going to go? Not this time. And you redraw those boundaries again and again and again. Now we're talking about giving and receiving. So the Alchemy program, make space, invest well, honor the cycles, transmute story. And number 5 is receive more in order to give more. So let's understand giving and receiving. And you cannot understand giving and receiving without understanding self. And this whole preamble about mindfulness and self, no self, etc., has all been in the service of understanding self. And self wants to do this thing here. It wants to avoid pain, then seek pleasure, and then try to do everything efficiently. That's the motivational triad. And in the service of that, what is happening is there is always somebody who's brokering the power. There is somebody that has a need of something. And there is the thing that's being given, the gift, which means there's the act of giving and the act of receiving. And then there's this subjective differential gradient between the two parties. This one has more of something and that one has less, and this one wants it and that one wants to give it. And so therefore there's a giving and there's a receiving. Always, in all things, this is happening. Now, this is related to rejection and acceptance, magnetic and electric, and it's related to consent. Consent does not mean saying yes. Because consent means when two adults both understand the circumstances and the request is made and the other one provides an enthusiastic yes, knowing full well what the implications are. That is consent. When one of the people are not being an adult or cannot be an adult or is not yet an adult, the best you can do morally is expectation management. Make sense? So if we look at what a self and an other is, that's doing the giving and the receiving, everything, so self and other are in a mathematical relationship. Self equals other. Other is everything else in the whole universe outside of me. At the boundary of my consciousness and my skin, I'm going to call everything outside of that other. Now that's a wobbly line because as you've noticed and you mentioned earlier on, there are things that are subconsciously happening inside of me that seem to come up that I noticed that I didn't author. So is that myself? Or do I have an unconscious self? It makes it a bit squirrely. But fundamentally, when I'm thinking about giving, receiving, having, avoiding pain, seeking pleasure, and conserving energy, it's the everything on the other side of the equal sign that I have to negotiate with in order to make those three things happen. And everything on the other side of the equal sign is the infinity of everything else. Every one that ever existed, every one that exists now, and every place and everything and every energy. But here I am, a sovereign self with a consciousness. And I have an infinity inside of me too. Fractal infinity. You can zoom in and zoom in and zoom in and zoom in and zoom in, and it never gives up. And you can zoom out and zoom out and zoom out and zoom out, and it never gives up. It's mathematical, recursive. And similarly, the infinity sign on this side is made up of lots of small individuals, properties, placeholders in creation, different selves. What do we do to get this working better in our lives? For some of us, when we say, I want to receive more so that I can give more, some people, that quantity that they are talking about, that currency is love and affection. For some people, that's money. For some people, that's attention. For some people, that's opportunity, space, ease, peace. So what are these valuable commodities to you at the moment? Brian, what's your valuable commodities at the moment? What do you have to negotiate with other people to get?
Time, more time.
And you've been on the dating circuit as well.
Yeah, that's time as well.
Right. It's time and it's attention, and it's also a selective form of attention and consent and intimacy. That's the thing that you're trying to broker, but you need to receive in order to give. But we trick ourselves that it's the other way around. I have to give in order to receive, because I'm in a fear-based mindset. True?
Yes, although it's more true with me and work at the moment than it is with dating.
Well, let's talk about that. So let's take that example. Let's keep scrutinizing your life on recorded on air. Yeah. What's the scenario? Yeah.
I just work just seems to take more than it gives, regardless of salary or time. You know, just I've had to work the past 3 public holidays just to get by, but it is a very I'm giving too much.
Sure, and you're giving too much because that's what the expectation is, or is it harder to say no, or
both? I think, yeah. It's
So there we're now exploring the ideas of where to integrate and or comply versus withdraw versus expression of power. And so what you're doing is you complying, and your own needs you're forcing to withdraw, which is going to generate regret.
Yeah, so it's the negative exaltation of compliance.
Yeah, exactly right. But on the other side, there is the non-consensual taking, because somebody's not asking you, "Hey, Brian, how are you going? You know, is this a good balance for you? Are you okay with this?" There's no consent. It's just taking, mindless taking. So in the absence of consent, what's the next best thing?
Realigning expectations.
Expectation management. And who needs to do the expectation management? Always the adult, always the conscious adult. It is the conscious adult's responsibility to manage expectations, to draw boundaries. Because if you do not do that, you are letting unconsciousness drive it, and your response will always be fear, always. Always. And when you're coming from fear, the result will always be regret. Inevitable, eternal, always true.
Yeah.
Somewhere underneath that is a story that says, if I push back too hard, I might lose my job, or I'll get seen as a negative person that always complains, or I will X or I will Y, which is story. Now, the one before that is honoring the cycles, which means you can't go in every day and bitch and complain, but you can do it at a quarterly review, or at a monthly meeting, or at a weekly stand-up, to the right measure that can be controlled or contained within that cycle. Because part of expectation management is doing it cyclically, so that if you mention it in the stand-ups, and then you mention it in the monthly meeting, and then when you bring it up at the quarterly, no one's surprised, and they know where you are, and they'll acknowledge and say, yes, no, I know you've been raising that. Expectations have been managed. Let's take another example and stop dragging Brian's laundry out into public. Go on, Catherine. I know you've got an example for us. Come on, don't let me down. Okay, Catherine.
I think she needs to manage the expectations of the cat.
Yes. Who else has got an example for us? Meow. What's the cat's name, Catherine?
Pita.
All right.
It's not my cat.
Fair enough. Come on, anybody. Come on. Don't let me down. One more example. Is this making sense to everybody, by the way?
Yes.
Right. The trick is Story will tell you, and convention will tell you, and the way our sick society has been programmed. Remember, Jiddu Krishnamurti said it's no sign of good health to be well adjusted in a sick society, which means we are in a sick society and we are trying to adjust well to it. And the net effect is negative mental health, or detriment to mental health, or detriment to love and happiness and emotional security and all the rest of it. Why is that? Because it's happening in the absence of consent, and there is giving and receiving without consent, which is taking or violation or enduring. And these are all shadow expressions. And our needs are not being met. And we're not standing up for our needs, which means we are not consciously redrawing these boundaries. And with people that we cannot draw consensual boundaries with, we are not practicing expectation management. Now, here's the last concept that you need to think of, is a container. You have a work container, you have a relationship container, you have a hobby or a project container, you have a container of self, you have anyone that you are in some kind of exchange with, giving and receiving, you develop containers. And those containers can either be developed consciously or unconsciously. The quicker you start introducing expectation management. I have one of the participants, Lawrence, he's in Chicago, so he really makes the calls, but I'll talk about the scenario that he was having. He's a real estate agent, and you have to do a lot of spade work, a lot of peddling, a lot of showing one person many houses or many people through a property. There's high numbers, low return, and the market does what it does. You can't force outcomes. So some people crack the shit, some people get impatient, some people drag you along and they make you show 16 places or 16 visits or follow up with 16 queries only to go cold and disappear. But the expectation on him, according to etiquette, is to always be delivering the best service, which means he has set an unfair expectation on himself to be always proactive, always reaching out, give them the absolute best. But at no point in time up until then was he doing a checkpoint with them to say, quite proudly, hey, I'm the best in this district. I've got an award for this. And what that means is I'm going to give you the very best, but it also means I'm going to be very, very careful and laser sharp with my time. So how I'm going to do that the best way is I manage expectations with my prospective clients. I'll literally check in with you after every single appointment and say, hot or cold, where you at? Do not tell me nice sounding good news. Tell me the truth. The more truthful you are, the more intelligently I can react to your needs, and I can stop peppering you. You won't feel awkward. I won't feel awkward. It's a breath of fresh air. It saved him hours and hours, and never mind the hours, the emotional energy between people. Oh God, Lawrence is such a nice guy. I don't know what to tell him. I'm just going to sit and have a conversation with him for 15 minutes. Lawrence has got other shit to do with that 15 minutes. But instead, the client now doesn't want to be unkind to him, and he doesn't want to be unprofessional. They're in a container that's not been set consciously. The other client is not a spiritual adult. You cannot practice consent. So in the absence of consent, what's the next best prize? Expectation management. So simple. Think about the scenario, manage the expectation. Proactively, repeatedly. And if you are feeling awkward about doing it, you are confused. You do not owe people your time, your energy, and attention. Let me give you a thing to write down. Friendship. Get your pen, Catherine. What? No pen. How dare you? Friendship is where you do for free, out of love, what you would normally charge for. Friendship is where you do for free, out of love, what you would normally charge for, or what would normally have a price. Community is simply where you charge a fair price. A healthy community requires people to charge fair prices. And fair price isn't just in the green. It's fair both ways. So if somebody has a valuable commodity, in other words, it is worth something to date them, or it's worth something to have them on a project, or it's worth something to have them in a container, then it comes at a cost. It comes at a price, a fair price. But you have to be objective about your own value, otherwise you can't set a fair price. And if you cannot set a fair price, you are fair game for all the opportunists who will take, because they are wired to take, because they are in a fear-based mindset. And getting something for free with no commitment is a win. And so we learn to give ourselves away, give ourselves away, and give the best of ourselves away. Because we get told with this mind virus of Western thinking that's been infected by Christianity, that giving and charity is good. But if it's not sustainable, it's not good. And the cost is your mental health, your wellness, your self-respect, your time, your attention, your energy. Either you value these things or you do not. Does that example make sense to you guys? Lawrence's example. And that's a win-win. Win-wins exist. Abundance ensures that win-wins exist. The principle of abundance in this universe. You don't manifest abundance. How ridiculous. Abundance just is. Abundantly. It is an abundant principle of creation. Abundance. And in exactly the same respect, the things that you want and you need, there are win-wins. Because think of that scenario with Lawrence and the property agent and the people that he's trying to sell to. They have a financial situation at home that changed, but they are too embarrassed and they don't want to waste his time. So their two people are now playing the polite game on each other, wasting each other's time, both feeling uncomfortable and reluctant the whole way. And what is missing? Consent and expectation management. And you teach people consent by practicing expectation management. You raise the bar of everyone around you. And this is true in love, in dating, in cohabiting with someone that does all the housework, in a real estate business, in a family business, in negotiating hours at work, in absolutely everything. So for me, at the risk of boring you all to death and talking about myself some more, this alchemy program, you know, when I first ran the Facing Discomfort program, Sarah, you did that, Catherine, Luis, you did that. That was a good program. That was intelligent. It helped. It had some really cool shit in it. And I'm just trying to kill a mosquito here. And I mean, I just did it from the kindness of my heart. I learned so much. I learned how to put programs together. It was great. But it was a high cost on my time. It was a high cost on following it up, doing the comms right and all the rest of it. I didn't mind doing it, but it's not sustainable. Not when baby came along, because I had to like pick my battles. And I thought, how can I keep adding value? Well, I can charge. Oh, I don't really want to charge, you know. Fuck it. Why? It's such a good thing. What else am I going to do with my time? What are you doing with your time and money? What a brilliant idea. I'll tell you what, I'll commit to giving you really good time and attention because it's good shit. And you commit a reasonable amount for win-win. Because if you're paying a bit of money, you've got some skin in the game, which means you're paying more attention. And if I'm charging, it means I'm going to bring out my A game because you're charging. This is, there's no downside. And I arrive here every fortnight with that same level of enthusiasm because I'm giving from a free, open heart, and it's working. It's working for you and it's working for me. That is the power of managing expectations, creating a container, valuing myself, setting my boundaries healthily in a win-win, and giving and receiving in a symbiotic way where no one's losing. It can be done. So receive more to give more. What do we want to receive? That's for you to decide. What's this currency that matters to you the most? For some of us, it's permission. For some of us, it's acceptance. For some of us, it's love, affection, being wanted, being respected. There's always a gift. And where there's a gift, there's a cost. And sometimes the cost is our naivety. Sometimes the cost is this pretend virtue that we think, which is politeness or being kind. Kindness is not always the greater kindness. Prudence sometimes is greater kindness. If there's a wolf at the door and I let you sleep, letting you sleep sounds like a kindness. If somebody else is inside the room and I wake you up, it looks like an unkindness. But I'm the adult. I know it's prudence. Prudence is the greater kindness. Politeness is not kindness. Politeness is fear of conflict masquerading as self-control or as manners. It's not. It's cowardice. And so many other things. Trying. There's another classic. Trying. What a winner. We've got to try. When you're doing a thing that's burning your energy. Remember I wrote in the Alchemy program, the worst thing a smart engineer can do is solve a problem that shouldn't be there in the first place or optimize a problem. That's what trying is. And the example I give is it's noble to try. You got to keep trying. Don't give up. If I had kept in my first marriage and the job that I hated, I was in that marriage for 12 years and I was in the job for 6 years. And that back end of that 6 and 12 were coinciding. If either one of those two was just 10% less shit, 10% more bearable, I would still be there because I was taught to try. My soul was dying. My casualty was my mental health and my self-respect. But I was trying. Windowsills are the eternal shrines to the gods of trying, where one may always find more dead flies. If you go to a windowsill, there's always a dead fly there. And you clear it away and tomorrow there's another one there. Why was he there? He's there because he exhausted himself to death trying to get out of an impassable barrier. But my God, did he try? There's no prizes for trying. There's a prize for smartness. Invest your time well. Choose where to express your power and energy, where to comply and integrate and interact and connect, and where to withdraw. Because sometimes the act of withdrawal, like Chris did on a retreat, sometimes the mountain is clearer to the climber when he stands in the valley. You got to get away. You got to make space. That's why we do our retros and our reviews. Now, if that didn't pump all your tires, I don't know what will. How's that, everyone?
Yeah, funny that you make reference to a mountain, because that's kind of been a big contemplative thought of mine then. The space that we were in at the retreat was kind of at the base of the mountain and kind of considering that like mountains need to be, like us need to start climbing mountains, not start looking at them from the bottom.
Yeah. And there's a time and a place for that. Because sometimes you've got to go back and like redevelop a strategy and then go march forward again. It's actually a really good analogy to close with. So let me see if I can. I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to find it's an article I wrote. Some time ago. Okie dokies, here is the article. Ugh. And then we'll close out. I used to blog. This was on now. on ego. Ego isn't a thing or a personality. So this thing that we're trying to beat, this strong authored sense of self, it's the shadow cast. There's no evil agency. It's just an innate compulsion, a gravity that persistently asserts itself effortlessly and ceaselessly. It is Bugs Bunny sneaking back into the house again and again and again and again, and tricking Elmer Fudd in 100 creative ways. Everything you know, it knows. There's no evil agency, even though the system of experience feels insidious. The way, if you take something that's got cracks in it and you put it underwater, the water will seep in. The water is not evil. The water is just doing what water does. There was a crack, it fills it. That's how ego operates. When there's a lack of stillness, ego's out there solving problems, taking names, trying to solve the unsolvable paradox of choice and surrender, and going berserk trying to do it. Ego is not a thing which can be destroyed. It's a property of life, of having a self. It's pervasive to and inherent in the whole, this whole system and cycle of life and experience. And every level of conscious awareness, there is an aspect of ego. There's also two very distinct egos at play all the time. There's the self-ego and the species ego. Think about this. Human beings are social animals. We put ourselves in tight proximity with other people that compete with us, irritate us, challenge us. Like we constantly have to negotiate this arms race of attention, giving and receiving amongst all these people. It's a very complex economy. It's very taxing to do that. Why would we do that? We do that because the species ego allows it or chooses it in the interests of survival. Tribalism is something we do to lean towards connection in the interests of survival. When we're eating because the self-ego wants the individual to survive. When we're collaborating with others, we're doing it because the species ego wants the species to survive. And those two tolerate each other. The only reason the species ego tolerates the self-ego is because the self-ego is one of the species, and the more the merrier, and the more that survive, the better for the species. And the only reason the species ego is tolerated by self-ego is because, well, if I die, at least a version of me stays and keeps going on. And my people, my kind, I can extend my sense of self to my species. So let's play with this analogy of the mountain. So if we're thinking that a mountain, climbing the mountain and reaching the peak, conquering the mountain, this metaphor of spirituality is what we're chasing in the killing of the ego, or the conquering or the defeating of the ego. How do we dwell up here in these lofty places in sight of the summit, away from cliffs, precipices? How do we navigate the unsteady, uneven terrain? How do we, as natives of the temperate valley below, not have to conquer the mountain again and again and again every single time? Because once you've conquered the mountain and you come back, you haven't conquered shit. There's no conquering that happened. You temporarily conquered your own limitations. That's it. The mountain is still perfectly there in all of its massive glory. The climber has to descend eventually. And if they want to go up, they have to conquer the mountain again, anew. So how do you live up there? How do you get closer to the peak? How do you do that?
We need to spend some time up at the top or getting somewhere there first to sort of become accustomed
Well,
to the environment.
a couple of things. First of all, you have to have help, or an explanation, or a guide, or a teacher, or something to aim at, some path to follow, somewhere that's gone before you and put hooks into the rock so that your chance of slipping is less. Number one. So somebody have to have opened a way. Number one. Number two, you have to acclimatize. So you build a base camp. You go away for 10 days with friends that are all doing the same thing, with a teacher there. And now base camp, now the summit's in reach. It's not starting all the way from the bottom. I'm close now. And then after I've done it a few times, my practices, my breathing practices, my mindfulness practices, my yoga, my whatever it is, my avoidance of caffeine and sugar and alcohol, my self-control, my setting of boundaries, my not being triggered so much. What I'm effectively doing is I'm building a log cabin just below the tree line, halfway up the mountain. And I'm putting a cache in there. And I'm learning to survive up there. And I'm becoming familiar with the terrain up there. Psychologically, I'm integrating that experience. Actualizing is climbing the mountain. Integration is making it my own, becoming a mountain man, building a cache up there. Choosing good weather. I wouldn't try it in winter. I honor the cycles. I pick my battles. And so, beautifully, the mountain is this metaphor of gravity, of nature that we have to overcome to reach the peak. And beautifully, you'll notice with the pyramid is the critical mass is stacked at the bottom, which means the higher you can climb and acclimatize, the easier that last little stretch becomes because there's less to conquer. Physically, there's less gravity to overcome. The gravity of ego starts losing its grip on you. So as you actualize and integrate and actualize and integrate and actualize and integrate, and you start living higher and higher and higher up the mountain, ego loses its grip on you. It's always present, but it's weaker. The gravity of it is much less because you are living higher up, and the gravity of nature that is contending against your will is less. That's why we have practices. That's why we have cycles. Meditation is trying to teach us stillness. Our practice is trying to teach us routine. You want to know how you really achieve stillness? You don't have a magic superpower which will fight every single storm and every single problem. You have a routine, a seasonal routine that says, in winter, I'm not facing problems anymore. That becomes spring's problem. Right now, I'm resting. In autumn, I'm enjoying the harvest. I'm not crushing it in the fields anymore. That's next summer's problem. And I can put my cares down, not because I'm an unconscious idiot, but precisely because I trust and believe in my routine. And I know my next best opportunity will come. But right now, I need to rest. I need to receive more so that I can give more. So I develop cyclic routines. I honor the cycles and I keep making space so that I can invest well. I keep trying to align with the lunar cycles. I keep in training myself with the way that the world works so that my personal amount of effort that I have to throw at things goes down and down and down and down and down, and I conserve my energy. This is why this is smart. It's not just a bunch of cute slides. There's maths involved here and psychology and it's clever. And this is the way forward. Because if you want something to be stable, you give it a cadence, a rhythm, a steadiness, and then it gets stability. And nothing will give you untapped stillness like stability. So in these last few weeks, we're really going to focus on the seasonality of every part of the lunar cycle. And you're not going to feel it in the beginning. You're going to be out here and the lunar cycle is going to be over there. But slowly over time, we're going to nudge closer and closer and closer until your spring is at first quarter and your high summer is at full moon and your autumn is at waning gibbous and your winter is at new moon. And you just entrain yourself and you set your practices accordingly. Winter is the time for grief. Summer is the time for pushing, getting shit done. Spring is the time where everything's new. I'm starting a new sprint, a new plan, a new I've rebuilt, I've rejigged my plan. I'm redecided what's my priorities, where am I going to give ground, where am I going to withdraw, where I'm going to integrate, where I'm going to express power. I've laid my battle plans out. Now stick to this plan now. There's an energy in spring, in the first quarter of the moon. There's an energy in summer, full moon. There's an energy in the waning gibbous, and there's an energy in the new moon, the winter. And if we start doing these things at their right time, you're going to crush this. But if you dip in here and out and you piss fart and you watch the video like 4 weeks late and you're going to keep struggling because you're spending more time doing things that could take care of themselves. Does that make sense to everyone?
Making more sense every week.
Making more sense every week. What have I done here? I'll take notes when I rewatch. I know, I'm just teasing you, Catherine. Teasing you and the cat. Okay, so that is me for today, everyone.
What was that quote about the windowsills and trying the fires?
Oh, that's a classic, isn't it, Luis?
Yes.
That is a classic. Let me see if I can find that for you. Give me 1 second. I can, of course, just quote it to you, but I want to show you the pretty picture.
Oh.
Yeah,
Nice.
I know, right? There's a pretty picture. Of course, it'll be in the last deck that I look at. This is what you can look forward to when I eventually run the Accepting Your Nature course again. Can you see that?
Yes.
Windowsills are the eternal shrines to the gods of trying, where one may always find more dead flies. And this is Sisyphus, the man that was doomed to push the rock up a hill every single day because he tried to cheat the gods. And when he gets up to the exponential curve of the hill, the rock becomes too great and crushes him. And he's reborn the next morning to try it all over again. And the irony is that he's doing that to get it over the peak because he's told that if he does that, he will achieve immortality. And what is immortality but the promise of waking up in the morning again at the bottom of the hill, only to push the same fucking rock up again and again and again for eternity? So it's paradox. And Sisyphus is seen as the poster boy of trying because he keeps cracking at it. At no point in time has he ever gone, no, fuck this noise, I'm out. Because he believes with hubris, surely, just one more push. Surely I'm going to get it this time. Surely if I just X and I just Y and I put my leg just so. And that is the heart of this foolish thing that we treat like a virtue, which is trying. Take stock, step back, decide, stop, start, keep. Is this working? Am I in a rut here? Am I going in circles? What am I doing? That's what the quote was about.
Thank you.
That's it. I'm gonna stop there. Hard stop. Any other questions? No?
When's our
he
next
was kind of-
meeting?
What's that?
No, when's our next meeting?
So I'll release a video this coming weekend, and the weekend after we'll have another Zoom call. So every 2 weeks I do a Zoom call, and the interceding weeks I do a video for you guys. So the last one was on story. The one before that was like sort of half story, half cycle, and I keep matching the previous subject to the previous topic to the next topic. I think it helps it all lock it in for you guys. So what we'll probably do next week is we'll do a recap of everything.
Good.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay,
Fantastic.
super. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for making the time and jumping on the call. It means a hell of a lot to me, and all the rich discussion and questions make such a wonderful experience for people to come and watch the video later. It adds so much color to it. It adds so much depth to the conversation, and it's adding quality to the whole program. And I really, really appreciate that. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.